Psych with Mike and Brett is now a book. Psych with Mike and Brett, A User's Guide to Being Human, is like a roadmap to understanding what it is to be human and how those who do therapy conceptualize and treat the individuals that come to see them. So whether you just want to understand yourself better or you are in the field, Psych with Mike and Brett, A User's Guide to Being Human has something for you. Pick one up today using the links in the description. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike and Brett. Welcome into the Psych with Mike and Brett library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan.
And I am Brett Newcomb.
How are you today?
I'm doing well.
And I am doing well also, even though you didn't ask me. I'm doing well.
I'm like Emil Coué. I'm doing better and better
every day.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, something that I am really thinking about right now is the idea of screens and kids, specifically adolescents. We've talked a lot about what is the linkage between the levels of loneliness and adolescents specifically, but just in general in the population. One of the things that I am struck by is that there is an ongoing research study called Monitoring the Future that's done out of the University of Michigan. And they have looked at what is going on in the lives of teenagers for decades, since the mid-1970s. And it wasn't until the late 1990s that they even saw loneliness track as a concern for adolescents, but it was exactly the same year that the number of iPhone users in the United States topped 50%. And so I don't think that those things are a coincidence, that as we've seen children and adults be more and more online, that there is a concomitant increase in levels of perceived loneliness. And I'm just absolutely enthralled with this connection. And so I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that and see what you thought.
It's such a complex problem. Looking at screen time usage, and isolation and loneliness is a major concern. We have seen all the information about suicidal ideation increasing, suicides increasing among teenagers. Loneliness as a factor is one of the major reasons to underscore the suicides in older white males. So suicide is a factor, depression is a factor, but there are so many other factors when we talk about screen access and screen usage. So I think it's a very complex problem. A lot of different issues that I want to mention about it. One, there's a man on screen, there's a man on TV and radio named Michael Smerconish, who is doing a national Mingle project where he goes around the country and gives speeches, but he's setting up committees and connection groups and things in as many places as he'll set up, just to reach out not only to adolescents but to adults to say, make contact, socialize, turn off your screen, and get in a room or stand face to face with somebody else and talk about something. There are ancillary benefits to interpersonal connection that's not mediated, and so he's doing that. But there are other things that are going on that we ought to talk about. I mean, I remember 15 years ago, I was giving a lot of speeches around the country in school districts all throughout the Midwest, talking about parents need to be aware of what is on their child's phone or computer. And I'd go to these group discussions in a school where the parents would come in and I'd talk about this stuff, and they were dismayed. They were like, oh, that can't be happening. 6th, 7th, 8th grade girls and boys who were getting hardcore pornography on their phone, and their parents were like, no, my kid's not doing that. I'm like, look at the phone. I don't know how. Learn how. One of the things that I would always recommend in those days, especially if you have an Apple computer system in your home, if your child has his own computer, you buy or you enslave it before they get it to your computer, which means that you can go online and check their online site usage, so you can see where they're going, what they're looking at, and if they're going to places that concern you, whatever. I mean, whether it's pornography or something else, looking up how to make a bomb, looking at how to get a gun, or looking up the history of serial killers, then you have an opportunity to say, I want to talk to you about this.
Right.
What's your interest? What drives this? How are you using it? What are you doing with it? Why are you spending so much time on it? That's one thing. The other thing, when you talk about just screen time, we would give, you and I both, conversations with parents of kids that we were seeing as clients, but also in presentations to larger and larger groups around the country, a recommendation that you restrict the amount of screen time. Sometimes for behavioral modification, like if your kid's acting out, if he's sassing his mother, if he hits his mother, he slaps his mother, take away his phone. And parents were like, oh, couldn't do that.
Right.
He'd get very destructive. He'd tear down the walls of the house. He'd ruin my car. And we were like, okay, you're already out of control. They're out of control. So learn how to turn off the internet to your house at 10 o'clock. Then you can't get on it. And they were like, but I want to use it at 10 o'clock. I'm on the computer at 10 o'clock. And you need to learn how to set up a different internet for your kids and then turn that off. I mean, there are all kinds of technical solutions, and parents want to hide behind technical ignorance.
Right.
I don't know how to do that.
Right.
But it's a serious, serious topic.
Well, and even hide behind the idea of, but I myself require this access to the internet. I couldn't turn the internet off because I'm doing my work, my work that I get
Especially
paid
when
to
you work
do.
from home.
Right.
You know?
And I've always found that to be a little bit thin. I mean, if you're saying to me that you can't afford to be a good comprehensive parent because you have a job, I don't know that that's that's really the argument that we want to be making. You know, so clearly all of us now, I'm no different, I'm not saying that I am, are beholden to the internet. It's difficult to separate it from our lives.
Yeah. I have an acquaintance who spent $3,000 a day for 2 months to have his daughter in an eating disorder clinic because she was on the internet and was being picked on about her weight and her looks, and decided she would starve herself till she looked beautiful. And there's a point at which they lose control over that. Just like if they're bulimic, if they teach themselves to throw up, initially they'll eat whatever calorie intake they want to eat, and then they have to like stick a finger down their throat and make themselves vomit. But the more often they do that, they get to a point where they can just look at a toilet and decide to vomit, and they do.
Right.
And then it moves to a point where they can't not do it, and it's problematic. So there's a critical staging of those kinds of behaviors that needs to be treated. But it often begins with access to screen time on the internet, especially if it's a mean girl situation, if somebody's bullying them or criticizing them, making fun of them. There's so many stories about boys and girls who killed themselves because they were bullied online, and their parents in the school never knew anything about it. Another complication. I was talking to a client friend of mine about this issue, struggling with their teenager, and I said, okay, she needs to turn off the school. No, it was the school wanted her to turn off her phone at school. And my client said, I told her not to do that because if there's a school shooter situation or crisis, I want her to be able to reach out to me, and I'm going to come no matter what. And I said, well, if that's going on, the police are going to be there. They're not going to let you approach the building. They're not, well, I don't care. I'm going to get my own gun. I'm going to go. Okay, those are different conversations we need to have. But school districts all around America are now experimenting with policies for limiting phone access at school. But a lot of parents are fighting that because of the safety factor around guns.
And for full disclosure, we're doing this in March of 2025, recording this, and I just saw a news article today, just read a news article today, that the state of Illinois is looking to pass a law that's going to take cell phones out of classrooms, and one of the
put them in
primary
lockboxes when they get to school.
Is exactly that. Well, what happens if there's a school shooter?
Right.
And I mean, it pains me to think that we're in a society where we have to think about those things. Although I recognize that that is a very real concern.
Well, we've been in schools for years doing clinical work, and one of the things that comes up in those schools all the time is, okay, the school provides a computer or an iPad or a laptop for the student to use. We regulate what kind of apps can function on the computer. We shut down things like porn sites that they can't go to. Two concerns about that. One is very often we don't know where the porn sites are, and sometimes they accidentally find them. There was a famous porn site, White House,
Right.
that kids found while they were doing research in a civics class for something to do with the national government, and the difference was .org versus .com, because one was a government site,
.gov,
and the other was a porn site, a really hardcore porn site. So you're sitting in ninth grade civics class and you pull this site up, and all the people sitting around you see what nobody wants them to see. So sometimes it's accidental, but it happens. And sometimes the kids, one of the things they do, especially the smarter ones, they figure out how to get around the blocks.
Absolutely.
And so they're in class using these things. And teachers have been complaining for years that, I'm trying to give a test and this kid's looking up the answer on his phone. Or he's put down formulas that we're using on a math test and he pulls up the formula, which is illegal to use on a test, but I can't keep him from doing that. I remember having a graduate class of counseling students where I was lecturing about something and I'm watching people in the back of the room turn their computer on and follow the ball game.
Right.
And so I have to have a conversation with them about, okay, one of the things you have to learn to do as a counselor is focus your attention and be aware. And if you're not learning how to do that, if you're that distracted, then how are you going to help clients do that?
Right. Absolutely.
And they would laugh it off as if, And I said, well, it's okay because it's market driven. If you're really good at your job, you'll have people come see you.
Right.
If you're not, you won't.
You won't.
Yeah.
And, both of us are old enough to have been born before computers were a thing, before the internet was even set up. And so we've lived our lives mostly, at least until I was in graduate school, without the internet, and raised our kids. I was raising my children when the access to the internet was essentially a desktop computer. And back then, the argument or the conversation that we would have is, do you let children have a computer in their room, behind a door that they can
or
lock
a TV?
Yeah. And have a screen, right. And that was a conversation that we would have. But, I could take the power cord from the computer from my child, and I never was afraid to do that, and know that he couldn't get the end. Now people would say, oh, well, he'll just steal a power cord from. Yes, I understand kids are incredibly resilient, but it was a very, very different time. Nowadays, everybody's walking around with a supercomputer in their pocket, and that is the primary way that 99% of the universe now accesses screens, is through those cell devices.
That they may not realize is so many families have, for instance, on their cell phones, they have internet coverage and they have cellular coverage. And so the cellular coverage on the phone is so that as you travel and you're away from the local internet cell that serves your home, if you turn your phone on, you can still get information on the internet on your phone. So if your kids have that and you shut off their internet at home and they have cellular, they're still getting it. And
or
you
the
don't
other
know
way
it.
around, if you shut down their cell, but they still have internet.
Right.
And parents don't, think about that, but those are things that...
Those little suckers will figure it out, or their friends will tell them.
Right.
And show them. I mean, this is sub-rosa kind of conversation. Teenagers always have private connections and private conversations that their parents are not privy to, and learn things that you don't necessarily want them to be learning. For instance, I read an article just this week about what they call influencers on the internet, and how these influencers populate a fad. And now that there are so many influencers and so much access to the internet and so many kids are doing it, the fads burn out quickly. But whether it's some silly thing with ice water,
right,
or some product to purchase, or style of clothes to wear, or makeup to use, that your kids go out and invest their money in. Oh, I need to get this shirt because that's the fad. A week later, it's gone. Then they never want to wear that shirt again.
Right.
I remember when my kid went out and got tight jeans. He wore them, skinny jeans, tight jeans, I don't know what they were called, but he wore them maybe twice. And then he said, I don't like those, and they're not popular anymore. And so he had spent $40, $50 of his money on them, and they're gone. That money's gone. Can't get it back.
Exactly. And so we just wrote a book, and it is now out. You can get it on Barnes and Noble or Amazon, or you can go to the Kendall Hunt website and to the publisher and get it. But we actually have a chapter where in the book where we talk about this idea of screens and loneliness and what the connection there is. And one of the things that I have found in my research is that a good rule of thumb is 4 hours. So that's about the line at which the use
4 hours
of a screen,
a day, 4 hours in the evening.
4 hours a day.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's about the line at which the screen time starts to become malignant. And this is a very, very general rule, so don't hold me to it. But that requires that you monitor your child's use, which you may not really be able to do very effectively,
right.
But B, that you actively participate in having conversations with them, but also helping them to be able to say no. Because what happens is that children and adolescents don't have the level of impulse control that adults do. And sometimes adults don't recognize that. It's harder for them to say no to these things that feel rewarding. And that's a parent's job, is to help them to be able to intervene and to be able to set good boundaries. But you have to be aware. You have to be having those conversations, and you have to be willing to actively take part.
You have to be aware. You have to know.
Yeah.
It's so hard because, again, living the life they live with the technology that they have available, they're going to say, if I switch from watching a movie to playing a video game,
that's a different thing.
A different experience.
That's right.
I had a lot of parents, when I was working more actively, ask me about video games and the potential damage from video games, especially the category of video games that are called first-person shooters.
Right.
There are some other categories that I recommended parents use or allow their kid to use. One in particular was a game called Minecraft, the world of Minecraft. And I found it to be really helpful in developing my child's ability to think logically and problem solve in a nonviolent system. Although now there's a movie out, a World of Minecraft movie, that from the blurbs that I'm seeing, the ads that I'm seeing, pretty violent.
Yeah.
So they've moved into a different domain.
Right.
So I don't know that my advice about Minecraft still holds, but there are computer programs that are more problem solving, puzzle oriented
I was just going to say, right.
And first person shooter games.
Right. But you brought up a great point, which I think is salient and something that we need to think about a little bit more. And that is, if I go from watching a movie to playing a video game to looking at YouTube to talking to my friends over text, am I still looking at a screen, or are those 4 different independent activities? And the answer is, you're still looking at a screen.
Right.
And what I think that, and I'll ask you what your opinion about this is, what I think that we really ought to be tracking is the difference between looking at a screen and interacting with a person. I think what we are missing, what we are losing, is the ability to interact one-to-one in a meaningful, salient way. And that's what I think we need to be tracking.
I don't disagree with you. As a matter of fact, I am aware that, hold on, let me take care of that so it doesn't continue to problem. We're talking about kids, and the same thing happens with grown-ups.
Absolutely.
As a matter of fact, there's a lot of information out there now about married couples not having as much sex as they traditionally have had, because each person in the marriage or in the relationship is looking at their own independent screen, pornography, and masturbating rather than having sex with each other. So they're finding that even that level of connection now has screen intrusions that allow us not to connect with other human beings.
Right.
The ultimate global problem that we're talking about is the ability or the need to connect with other human beings to avoid isolation that can then lead to clinical mental health problems.
Exactly.
Up to and including suicide.
And, you know, the people, I don't think, probably know, and there's no reason for people to know, but interacting with people one-to-one is a skill that actually changes the way that your brain operates. It changes the structures in your brain. And we are creating an evolutionary process by looking at screens. This is going to be something that we're not going to be able to understand.
If you're looking at a screen, it's
for
passive
possible generation.
receptive,
Yeah.
and it often comes with sight and sound that's been calculated for manipulating the way your brain spikes. If you're dealing with a person, you're having to use nonverbal communications,
Exactly.
which is a whole different conversation stream that uses a different part of your brain, and that is atrophying.
Right.
So it's a concern. We would recommend you give some thought to it, get some information about it, and as responsible parents and school districts, put limitations on it.
So again, we have a book out. It's called Psych with Mike and Brett, A User's Guide to Being Human. It is available at Barnes & Noble, at Kendall Hunt, and at Amazon. If you would like to pick up a copy, we would greatly appreciate it.
And once you've obtained it, turn the screen off because you have to order it online.
That's right.
Turn the screen off
And read the
it.
book. Exactly. The music
Read it out loud to your friends and family.
The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue, and if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike and Brett.